Hello everyone, so this isn't a gameplay video obviously. I wanted to talk about the EU referendum, which is coming up on the 23rd of this month. I've been watching some debates about it, I've been watching documentaries, reading leaflets and websites and blogs and stuff. And some things struck me that I thought I'd put in a video. I was watching a debate on ITV a few days ago, and they had for their Remain side, they had Amber Rudd from the Conservative Party, Nicola Sturgeon from the Scottish National Party, and Angela Eagle from the Labour Party. And on the Leave campaign side, there was Boris Johnson from the Conservatives, Andrea Leadsom from the Tory Party, and I can't remember how to pronounce her name, Gisela Stewart from the Labour Party. So it was both of the main parties from English politics were on either side, and then we had the Scottish Nationals as well. Now, one of the things that struck me was on the Remain side, it was all passion and no substance. They didn't make any coherent arguments, they lied. They kept talking about trade agreements and stuff, which I'll get into later on. But one of the things they kept doing was they kept getting personal. So they kept attacking Boris Johnson, saying, oh yeah, he just wants to become Prime Minister. Well, that's irrelevant. This is much more important than who gets to be the leader of the Tory party. I really couldn't care less about that. And they also accused the Leave campaign of lying, because on their battle bus it says something like, I can't remember how many hundreds of millions of pounds go to the EU each week, and they said it was, the sum was false, and they were aiming the question at, or the attack at, Boris Johnson. But Boris Johnson, Egypt, simply replied by saying, okay, how much of that 500 or 350 million pounds does Britain have control over? And not one of the Remain panel would reply. They just did personal attacks. And the Tory woman on the Remain side, Amber Rudd, every time there was a question, she just kept answering, there's no consensus on that, or there is a consensus on that, if it was something in her favour. And then I watched BBC's Question Time, so it was, members of the public asking questions, and I noticed something, that there seems to be an attack, a very pathetic attack on Nigel Farage. Now, I'm not a fan of Nigel Farage by any stretch of the imagination, but they, I think it was Eddie Izzard, kept calling him a little Englander because he didn't want to be part of Europe. And I noticed in Prime Minister's Questions, I think it was, yesterday, David Cameron said exactly the same thing about Nigel Farage, so I thought that's interesting. So it sounds like there's a hymn sheet being sung from. So Eddie Izzard was really getting on my nerves on this Question Time. He was basically just this kind of socialist logic that didn't make any sense. Saying, oh, the EU's really good, we should be in it, we should be running away from it. We're not running away from it, we want to get out of it. Or I do. But one of the things he said was, centuries ago you had England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and then they became the United Kingdom. So we're part of the European Union. Do we Why would we want to leave? Why would we want to go backwards? And that didn't make any sense at all, because for one thing, the EU isn't part of Britain. We're part of the EU. We're not in the driving seat. And also, if you take it to his argument to its logical conclusion, we used to have an empire that was we owned a third of the world. The saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire. So if you take his argument to its logical conclusion, should we then, if we don't want to go backwards and we're supposed to be moving forwards, should we then be aiming to take over the world? Because that's pretty much what he's saying. So also this whole socialist kind of obsession with bureaucracy and massive government, or big government. And it seems to me that that's the last thing you want. In a democracy, you want the government as small as possible, so it's accountable to the people, and you want the government to be afraid of the people, rather than the other way round. So that if the government does something unpopular, then the people take to the streets and protest, and then the government either loses power or does a U-turn, which is pretty much what happened with Margaret Thatcher's government when she brought in poll tax in the 80s. People took to the streets, she ended up out of power, and the poll tax was got rid of. Also, from my research over the last couple of months, since I started thinking about how I was going to vote, seems to show, or doesn't seem, it shows that the EU is inefficient, it's hugely wasteful, and it's also corrupt. And not only that, it's got a really low GDP. So we'd actually be far better off on the trade front, doing business without having anything to do with the EU. I mean, we could do business with the EU, but we don't need to make trade agreements, because we don't have trade agreements with the US, we don't have trade agreements with China, India, Brazil. In fact, what the EU does is it basically strangles competition. So you get, for example, Tate and Lyle came out, the sugar manufacturers, and said that they're from their one factory, I think it's in London, I think it was in London. They're having to pay over the odds for the sugar they bring in from Brazil, because they have to pay tariffs to the EU, because the EU wants to put prices up on everything, so we pay more, have a lower standard of living, and so Tate and Lyle are having to pay more for their sugar cane or sugar beet or whatever. And also JCB have come out and said we'll be better off outside the EU, and also so has Jeremy Dyson. And yeah, trade agreements, you don't need trade agreements. In fact, every time the EU tries to make a trade agreement, it takes years, and it's a complete waste of time because they're not needed. So it's a waste of time and money, which is pretty much sums up the EU. Also, the US want us to stay in, and I think I know why. I think it's because basically Obama and every other president has been a globalist. They want a one world government. And also John Major's come out saying we need to stay in, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and obviously David Cameron. And they're all globalists, they're all members of the Bilderberg Group. But one of the things that I think is that what we need is a bottom-up government, not top-down. We need it to be accountable, afraid of the electorate, and democratic. And you're not going to get that with a massive bureaucracy like the EU. If you look at history, every country that's like the Soviet Union, all of them had great big bureaucracies because they want to create work out of nothing. So they want to be involved in every part of your life, so it becomes a nanny state. If you look at the EU rules for everything, there's massive amounts of rules for things like toothbrushes and toothpaste, fridges, microwaves, hair dryers, ridiculous amounts of legislation that you can imagine how much it costs to write it all up and get all these committees together to argue about it. It's just a complete waste of time and money, and we don't need it, and I think we should leave. Anyway, obviously you've got to vote on what you believe. I'm just telling you what I think, but I would say I think we have a duty to vote because it's a constitutional right that was fought for. Well, that's my thoughts anyway. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.